You are all going to be very disappointed, but thank you for the preemptive applause. So as John mentioned, I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I have been originally born in Zimbabwe, but I have been living in South Africa for the last 25 years, so that is home. So my perspective on things is very much around what's happened in South Africa, I think, since the '94 period when it went through this massive political shift. And the conversation since then has been sort of really how to rethink a country that had existed for a good 100 years under a very particular system, and within that system has resulted in some inequities that have been really difficult to address. Also, another perspective necessary for me to say from the get-go is the fact that South Africa has really struggled to find its place, not only within the continent, but also in the world. So it's a country that is grappling with a lot of questions around what is the future and how it kind of tries to connect into what's happening into the rest of the world, and how it can participate in all these dialogues in which it is implicated, but has got very little influence. So in terms of the work that I do, it's quite diverse. So I'm going to just speak a little bit about that, but then really move on to a very particular project that I would like to discuss. So I work across on one question, but across many different modes. I work in publishing. I have been involved in a lot of publishing of books like Rogue Urbanism, which was a publication we did with Abdul Malik Simon and Edgar Peterson that resulted from a project that for the first time brought through together a range of very diverse people that were working on work and about on and about the city on the African continent, but hadn't really gotten a chance to, I suppose, really get together and kind of explore the similarities and possibilities of working together. So it's a doorstopper. I think the only person that has read it is the final editor, but some people like it, if only for the fact that it keeps the wind, at bay. A few other projects, 10 years, 100 buildings, which is a project that I was involved in many years ago, which was kind of like the first survey of post-apartheid architecture in South Africa. It's become like a really good source of trying to understand what is contemporary South African architecture, if there is a thing. Just to run through a few other things, I'm very involved in exhibitions and installations. It's very close to my heart. They're working in exhibitions because I worked for almost 10 years in various architectural practices that were specialized in exhibitions, and there was a point in South Africa where memorialization of stuff was key. So there were lots of new institutions, museum, galleries that were open. So I was involved on some level at that point. There is a lot of work, as I said, in different modes, so I will skip through it, but hopefully this graphic that took me pretty much until this morning, I did nothing else on the presentation, shows the diversity of the work. I want to talk a little bit about the African Center for Cities. It's a research center at the University of Cape Town, started about 10 years ago. It's doing work that has been very necessary. So I think in the last 20 years, there's been a conversation about urbanism and the future and cities and stuff like that, but there hasn't ever really been an African word or contribution to that conversation. So the African Center for Cities has tried to sort of change that dynamic. So for the last 10 years, it's led by a guy called Edgar Peterson, and has got some really fantastic people in it. It's been a place where the question of how do we, as people working in Africa and interested in Africa, can shift the dialogue of how people are speaking about the places we live in. Typically, these stories are very one-sided. A very particular kind of stories has been told. So we've been doing a lot of work that sort of like tries to reframe those stories, but not from claiming that we need to have a different story, but by actually doing the work. So the center is responsible for producing lots of research on issues as extensive as climate change on the one end, urban security on the other, food security on the other, housing. I think it's grown to almost about 50 people now. We've got about 60, 70 research projects running at any particular time. I would encourage anyone that has got an interest in cities on the African continent to just try to interact with some of that work. I think you might be surprised at what's out there. So part of my practice also includes a lot of exhibitions. Exhibitions are a very important way for us to be able to not just show our work, but to try to find a way to get people to interact with the work we've been doing, because it tends to be very dense. And even though our claim or our big interest is in trying to get it connected at all levels of society, we don't typically manage to do it in the books because they're very academic, so they live within a particular audience. So we've been doing a bunch of exhibitions which are very narrative driven. We've been trying to find a method to take some of the research that we're doing and really presenting stories that are very people-focused about what the research means in that realm. This is something we did about 2014, which was an exhibition about Cape Town called City Desired. We tracked 9 Cape Townians. If I had known that there was a Loeb Fellowship then, maybe we should have tracked 9 Loeb Fellows. But we tracked 9 Cape Townians of various income groups, race, geography, etc., to just really try to see if the census that had just been completed then in South Africa was really a reflection on how these people were living in the city. Recently I was one of the guest curators for the Rotterdam International Biennale, and after a lot of tussling and shuffling, they wanted a lot of like nice stories about Africa. So our people using smartphones and stuff were like, no, we really need to kind of like talk about the different institutions that are sort of like popping up that are contributing to what we think better. So that's been a good part of the job, has been to try to convince people that there's a different way of looking at things, and that there are different alternate narratives than what I think what tends to be in the press. So exhibitions are an important aspect. I've just run through a lot of photos. This is what I really want to talk about. This is some research that came out in 2011. It was done by the Oxford Institute in London, and it was their attempt at mapping the knowledge industry. So really try to figure out where is knowledge that is finding any traction globally is being produced, what impact it's having, and what that really means. So the takeaway is that the knowledge production enterprise, which I think a lot of us are involved in here, is very unequal. This cartogram, what it's showing is that this is the knowledge production of a country like the United States. So this is the number of journals that are being produced annually. And the intensity of the color is showing the impact factor, which I think everybody here being in an academic institution is familiar with, but it's really how how those particular journals are being quoted, and how that knowledge is traveling and seen to be important. So 3 things. This is the production for the entire African continent. That is something that I was like, wow, interesting. And if you look at the color, it's very, very light. So it's got no impact whatsoever. So that's Africa in total. That is South Asia, not any more impressive than what's happening in Africa. That is Latin America. So if we were to take these 3, you'll see that a country like the Netherlands produces more valuable knowledge than Latin America, Africa, and South Asia. And this is the context. We are talking here about 1.2 billion people in Africa, 43% urban at the moment. It's perceived to be, it's going to be a lot more than that. And I think we're breaking 50% in the next 5-10 years. 422 million odd in South America, and about 1.7 billion in South Asia. So this is more or less half the world. So the Netherlands produces more knowledge that's considered of any value than countries which have got cities that are larger than the Netherlands. So there's a perspective there. That graphic had a really big impact on me and has kind of informed a lot of the work that I've tried to do in the last, I would say, 8 years or so. The question that we came to after a whole lot of experiments and looking at what that research really means was actually the realization that a lot of the intellectual content that is being referenced in the world, that is talking about the developing world, that is talking about how things change, is really not being produced in the places where the change is needed. So I guess we have to ask ourselves, if that is the case, can we really expect things to change, or are we really on some level replicating the current dynamics which are there? And also the other question was, are there other voices out there that actually ought to be part of this conversation? So we started a project which was really a little idiosyncratic and has been finding a much more fluid voice in the last few years, and that is Cityscapes. It's a slow publication. People ask me, when will the next issue come out? I always say when it's ready. And there are many reasons to that. Partly, we're covering quite a large geography. We are trying to cover what's happening on the urban landscape in Latin America, in Africa, and in South Asia. So it's a task to try to put that together, but we also do not want to find ourselves in a situation where we produce something bad just so we can claim we have produced it. So we are really taking the time to try to do something that we are proud of at the end, and that we know that will not just be a magazine you live through like in one sitting and throw away. We almost approach every issue as a mini project unto its own. And when I mentioned how important exhibitions are, to me personally, it's because we almost look at every issue almost in the same way. So it's a curation as much as it is an act of editing and putting a publication together. This is the coverage that we have managed so far. We obviously have got a lot to do. What's listed in red is the countries that we have managed to cover so far. And I'll talk a little bit about the kind of coverage we do, and the countries that are sort of like faded a little bit in gray are countries that we would like to cover. Again, this is the region which has got that billion, 3 billion people that we say ought to be part of this conversation that's happening now. A few covers. I particularly like the one with the Kung Fu Kid. We're trying to do a publication that is very visually grabbing, because we have to compete with I think with a polluted landscape where the stuff we have to say is competing essentially against Cosmo and Opera and God knows whoever is fashionable these days. And just in terms of the aesthetic of the magazine, we work a lot. We try to very carefully in each issue, which are generally theme-based, really look at the landscape and see who's doing what we think is like alternative thinking around particular issues. This is Nida Kamani, who's this woman that has done some really amazing work in some of the slums in India. She has dedicated like 15 years of her life to essentially understanding how women are finding a way to function in some of these neighborhoods that are very informal in a lot of India. So how they are dealing with a lot of the gender issues that pop up in a country like India. We extensively, we do invest a lot in photography, so we've been lucky to get some really, really good photographers to work with us. Ivan Ban, who's actually got a lecture this evening, we got him to do some work with us early on. And so we have really been very lucky to get really good photographers working with us. We also do a lot of interviews, profiles, that sort of stuff. This is the story of Shahidul Ulam, who is in Pakistan. Really amazing photographer that has dedicated the last 35 years of his life to create a new crop of photographers that have essentially just gone around South Asia and really are doing some of the best work that has come out of there photographically. He's a real believer. He calls the global South the majority world, and he's very interested in sort of like creating the visual language that tells those stories. That is not like any of the development stuff that we tend to see on the regular. We invest a lot in reporting. This is a grueling story about how I think this is in Bangladesh, an entire city after like a big terrorist attack completely changed in sort of like how it relates to what's public and how there's been a big influx of extremist politics and politicians in the country, to a point where our interest is how it has affected the city, because a lot of people are living in that city. So these are the kind of stories we do. Photography, like I say, we are very generous with paper when it comes to photography. So why are we doing a magazine? The number one thing we're doing this magazine for is that for us it's a way to connect built environment professionals across the global south, because the connection is not there. If I want to meet people that I would like to work with, I'll go to New York, because I'll know I'll meet everybody from Brazil, from whatever, and now I'll come here. It turns out everybody comes here too. But that dynamic has to change. For me, to be honest, it's not acceptable. We cannot actually talk about ourselves while we are being curated by certain spaces. So I think we need to kind of like connect directly, connect in these places too, but we need to actually make a concerted effort to be able to connect directly. So this is one thing that we're trying to do with the magazine. The other thing is connect academia and academics across the South to practice. Initially, it was like, yeah, I need to sort of say that because I work in an academic institution, like primarily, but it's a key thing because academics have got the luxury of time, which a lot of practitioners do not have. I think the best work that's coming out really about understanding place is coming out of academia. So how do we connect that to practice? So that's a big like box that we need to tick and we need to work towards. Also, from the perspective that the institutions that are doing this important work are just doing it for academia. They are not doing it for practice. We need to find a way to cut through that. And we need the people that are responding to actually be able to be responding based on real research with real insights that will actually make that work perhaps a little more impactful than if it's just like a ship in, do something and get out without considering the larger picture. The third point is the idea that we need to amplify and unify the voices of people that are talking about cities in the global south. At the moment, it's fractured. You get one or two people that maybe have got a really solid, practice of and go around and actually speak really lyrically and beautifully about what's happening and what the future is, etc. But I think there is a much larger cohort of people whose voices are not being heard, and I think they need to be part of this conversation. So for me personally, this is the most important goal, to connect all these people that are doing this work in these regions and to try to see how we can have a strong, very articulate voice that counters, I think, the state of things now. This is the last 2 issues of the magazine. The right one, I'm happy to say, is our new South Asia edition, which just came out 2 months ago. We have been developing these regional editions, and this is the one. The material I showed you before, the spreads, are actually from this one. The Futurity one we did last year, I just put it up there because I think it's a really cool picture of a funky superhero. They're so in right now. Now where we are at is we have, out of the work we have done with the magazine, built a really, really vibrant network of people that are working on urban issues. These range from policy people to researchers to architects, and we have even asked 1 or 2 chefs to just write what they think about food in the magazine. So we really are trying to expand the idea of what an urban practitioner is from this region we're interested in. So we have got this, this network that has come up without us ever having seen that. We're just looking for people to contribute good content. And we are wondering, what is it that we can do with this emerging network now in the future? So this is one of the questions that I really want to try to see how we can address while I'm here. I'm going to play you a small short clip of this is awesome, of a video installation that we did as part of the Rotterdam Biennale last year. And so there are some questions in there that I suppose are part of my daily work and my daily life, and I just wanted to share the video. It's essentially a remix of a lot of video work that various people have done. And if I haven't been as articulate as I hope, as I would like to be, at least that video, I think, captures the spirit of what I'm trying to say. It's only like 1:30, so I will play it, and it's actually going to work this time.
I used to say that Africa has been participating in a sort of geopolitical championship. And everybody has been playing with a team of 11. For some reason, Africa decides to play with a team with 5.
This is the moment to build the infrastructure, to educate people, bring health.
We need that young blood, we need those young minds to come in.
The reality is that we don't have another 100 years to spend for the next set of development. What needs to change?
I look forward for the day we can do something about our currencies, our tariffs, our borders.
Africa is going towards multiple directions simultaneously.
We don't have to adopt Western solutions for African problems.
How do we think about the future of African cities and how to deal with these problems? We've got to change the way we think about economic development and how economic development can include people as opposed to structurally exclude people.
This is where I'm free. This is where I'm true. I have a place to call my own.
Thank you.